Hey everybody, this is scrapingindie.com with Python and Chrome DevTools protocol. So, what are we doing today? We will be showing you how to scrape a website with Chrome DevTools protocol. And there's a subtle reason why I'm choosing Chrome DevTools protocol and not a framework like Puppeteer or Puppeteer or Playwright or Selenium, etc., etc. So, let me just put a quick disclaimer out here. Anything that we do today is solely done for educational purposes or research purposes. I do not promote scraping websites in scale or even this small scale as possible. So everything that we do today here is for educational purposes. So that's it. So let me just put the title up there. So I'm gonna say Indeed Scrape. We'll just say Scraper using Chrome DevTools protocol. And the language I'll be using is Python. And the good thing about this video is if you're a C++ developer or a JavaScript developer, Java developer, the concepts for the entire script remains the same. And so you do not have to depend on any framework, right? So for example, a very common thing when if you've done web scraping before, this is something you've seen. Mostly web scrapers are written in JavaScript or maybe Python or maybe Java, right? That's the landscape. So if you're a C++ developer, you do not have to be sad, right? Everything that is written in Python can just written in C++ or C or Java or the language that you're familiar with. So let me just share what we'll be doing. We'll be scraping Indeed.com, and we'll be scraping only the job titles, right? And let's see, we'll have a SQL database. I'll be using SQLite just for tutorial purposes. So if you're familiar with Postgres or MySQL, just go ahead and use it. Only these SQL commands will be different. And what else? So we'll be using Python as our programming language. And I'll be using Chrome as my browser because I'll be using Chrome DevTools protocol. And what else do we have? So we have, okay, I need a fast API. I'll be using fast API to serve an HTML template just to, show the users, hey, these are the scraped details, and to insert the scraped job title into our database. So I'll be using that. So I'll be using fast API. You do not necessarily have to use this. So let's say fast API, and I've got SQLite, I've got that. I'll be using SQL model as my, the connection to the database and stuff so that I do not have to use a specific library. Like, so if you're using, let's say Postgres, then only the connection URL is different and you can just go ahead and have the same code in your code base. And let's see. So what I'll start with is by showing you a Indeed website of Indeed, and then I'll just show you, hey, what we are actually scraping. And I'll start with so let's just show the workflow here. I will be starting with the database part. So we'll just create our database, which is basically just one single file and the required table. So we'll have, let's say, jobs table or something else. We'll give it some name, and we'll then go ahead and create the API. So I'm going to say API, and then we will go ahead and work with the scraper code so that once you know what we're actually building using, we have a database, and then we'll be displaying the scraped job titles to the user, so then you have a better idea, hey, what we're actually building. I have an empty directory here. We have the docs file, which is basically the notes that we just wrote. And so this is where we start. I will start by creating a virtual environment, and I'll use virtual env. So I'll just name it env, and I will activate it using source env/bin/activate. If you're in Windows, it might differ slightly. So you can say /env/scripts/activate. I'm on Linux, so this should work for Linux and Mac. If you're on Windows, it might slightly change. Now, so we have that activated. Now we need to install the packages required. And what packages are we using? So just like we mentioned, we'll be starting with the database. So we need SQL model for our database connections and stuff. And for the API part, we've got fast API, and so fast API. I'll just use this. And I'm hoping this is correct. Let's see. There you go. So we have a SQL model and fast API being installed. There you go. And we need to send a WebSocket request and this WebSocket request to our browser. So we need the WebSockets package and we need to run some HTTP requests. So we'll use the request module for that. And we need to do some HTTP parsing. So I'll use Ginger. I think it's Ginger 2 or Ginger. So we need to Google that. So I'll say Ginger package Python. So that's Ginger 2. There you go. And so we'll just name it exactly like that. So Ginger 2. And we need LXML and Beautiful Soup 4, which is our, the HTML DOM parsing libraries that we need. So let's do that. So WebSockets, what happened? I'll get a pip install. Okay, so we have those libraries. And if we just do pip freeze, we can see all the libraries are installed in our virtual environment. And it's a very common practice to save all the installed packages to a requirements.txt file. So we will do that as well. So I'm going to say pip freeze and redirect us to this file. So requirements.txt. And we can see that. So if I do just cat that, we can see all the installed packages in that file. So if you're moving this to a server, if you're sharing it with someone, all they have to do is install these libraries using pip install minus r requirements.txt, and that will recursively install all the packages required. So what I'll do next is divide our code base into two parts. So like we said, we have the API part and the scraper part. So I'll just say create two directories. I'm going to say mkdir, or you can just do this using the GUI editor that you're using. So I'll just do this using the terminal. I'm going to say mkdir API and then say the scraper part, right? And I'll create two files inside each of them, which is the init.py. So inside our API, I've got init.py. Inside the scraper, I'll create the same. And inside the API, right, so we have our main.py, which is basically the fast API endpoints. And I'll create a database.py just to handle the connections. And we need a templates folder to sell the HTTP template. And I will have, let's say, an index.html for that. And let's see, I think that's all we need here. And inside the scraper.py, we'll have a utility, helper function file. So let's say util.py, and we'll have our indeed scraper.py. And I think that's all we need for this, right? And so this is where we'll start. We'll start writing the database code first, and then we will come back to the scraper at the end. So I need one more file in the API, which is to store all the models. We can't just keep this inside the main.py for clean code base. We'll just move this into models.py, which is basically the pydantic models for API. We'll look at that very soon. So we will start by creating the database file. So I will have the database file in the root folder. You can just store it anywhere you want. So I'm going to say I'll use the SQLite3 command line utility to create my database and kind of log into it. So I'm going to SQLite3. I'll say indeed.db, and we're inside this SQLite file. So if you're not familiar with SQLite, we'll look into a couple of commands so you're familiar with it. But then you could always use help to kind of figure out what commands are available. So if you type in Control L, so it will actually clear that out. So it will clear the clutter, and this is where we'll start. I'll create a table called jobs. So I'm going to say create table jobs, and I will say we've got an ID of int. I'm hoping this is integer, so I'll say SQLite integer. Let's see what we have. So I've got integer, SQLite integer auto increment. Let's say primary key auto increment, and I'll say job title. Let's just say title because the name of the table is type jobs. We'll say title text, and we will close that off, right? So if I do, how do I check if the table has been created, right? I could just say dot tables, and list me all the tables inside the database. And to check the schema of the table we just created, we could just say dot schema, and it'll show you all the schema of the tables, all the tables available. Or if you want to just check the schema of just the jobs table, you could just say dot schema and the table name, which is jobs, and it'll show you the same, right? Now, how do I just select all the rows? You could say select star from jobs, and there's no rows to return, so it returns nothing. So we'll just do an insert command to see if this is working fine. We'll do insert into jobs, and we'll give the column name that we want to insert. We'll say title, and say values. We'll just say, let's say software engineer, and do that, and we will do select star from jobs. Right now, the default, the return view of SQL is not very cool. So what we'll do is there are a couple of modes that you can explore. So if I say dot mode and table, and now check this looks much better. So I think there's another mode called dot box. So if you do this again, you have other modes. I think there's one more called column. And so if I do this, okay, that's much better than what we had. So I like the box mode. So I'm gonna say dot mode box, select star, and there we have. And how do I delete a row? Right, I could say delete from jobs. This will delete all the rows. Or you could say if you want to delete just one specific row, you could say id equals 1, and that will delete that row. So if I just say do this, we have nothing inside. So we'll just create insert one more just to see if the auto increment is working. So we'll just say software, let's say data analyst, right? And we will select, there you go, right? So it has the ID auto increment is working and the previous data is deleted. So the SQL database is working fine. So we will exit out of this. So to do that, you say dot exit, or you can just say control C. I'll use dot exit, and there we are. I will start with the the API code. So I'll just open Vim API, and I will start with the models file because we just have one model just for inserting, just one post request for inserting the records. So I'll do from Pydandex. So that's where we have our base model, and also class insert job titles model, so base model. I'll say title is of type string, and that's all we have there. Right now we will go into the database code where we will do the setup for the database. Cool. So to do that, I will import create engine from SQL model. You could always use SQL engine, SQL Alchemy, or SQL more any other library you're already familiar with. I'm just going to use SQL model. So I'm going to say import create engine, and what I need to do is say create the connection. So I'm going to say engine equals create engine of the file. So I'm going to say SQLite colon slash and dot slash indeed.db, which is where our locate file is, the SQLite file is. And I'll create a function called def get db session, which we will use in the API. So I'm going to say get db session and do this. And what do we do? So we will do this. We'll say we'll import session of engine as session yield the session, right? So this is what we will use. Now we will use this function as a dependency, fast API dependency. So when we use the API, we kind of know we have that session object to use. Now I will move to the API. So that's in the main.py. So let's create our API, right? So we will import from fast API, import the class fast API, and I will create an application with this. I'm going to say app equals fast API, and we will write our first route. So I'm going to say at app.get the home route. I'm going to say async def home, and we need the HTTP request coming in from to serve the template. So I'm going to say import request type, and I'll do request, and the type is of request, and we need to run a SQL query. So this is where we wrote the database function comes in. So just to view that, so we'll use this get db session as a dependency, and so we'll use this as session, and the type it comes from SQL Alchemy, and which is imported using SQL model. So I'm gonna say from SQL model import session, and I'll tell the type is of session equals depends get db session, which we will import from, if we look at this, from api dot database import, we can say get db session, right? And depends I need to import from fast api, just done for dependency injection, and I'll do this, and there you go. So for us to serve a template, we need to do something additional. So I'm going to say from fast api dot templating, if I'm not wrong one, there you go, templating import ginger to templates, and I will create the template config. So I'm going to say template equals ginger to templates, and directory equals templates directory, right? And we will go from here. We'll say return. We need to check that up. So let's say fast API return HTTP template. We will find the documentation for that. So import ginger to templates, create a templates directory. We have all of that. We have this. Now we need to return template request. I'll just copy this, and we will make sure that works. The name of the file for us is index.html. We will add some dummy content. We'll just say h1 hello world, and I'll say index.html, and the context will just keep it empty for now. And for us to run this, I'm going to say we'll just activate the virtual environment, and we'll go inside the API folder. We'll say fast API dev main.py. I've got already one application running on a different port 8080. So to run it on a different port, you say minus minus port, and let's just run it at 8080. So that works. We will run that. Okay, there you go. Hello world, that template works. And we will come back, and what else do we need to do? So we need to run a SQL query to kind of pull all the data, and before that we will set up our templates. I have generated a template using ChatGPT. I'll just paste that here. What I will do is I'll just show you how this looks. So if I do this, we've got scrape jobs, and this we've got dummy stuff there. What we will do is we will use Ginger templates to kind of extend this. So we have an unordered list here. So what we need to repeat is this li element, and we'll use Ginger templates. I'm going to say for job in jobs, and this n4, right, and change the content here. So we'll just say job, and that's it, right? And we will add a dummy content inside the SQLite database. So I'll just go here, open this using indeed.db. Let's say select start from jobs, and we have one here, .mode box. We'll just do this, and we'll insert a couple more. So I'm gonna say insert, just add one more, right? So insert into jobs. We'll say this title and values are going to be, what do we put? We'll say data scientist or data engineer, right? We'll add one more. We'll say analyst, and if we look at this, we've got 3 jobs in there, right? And when we run our template, when we run this select command on this, we should be able to view this on our template. So what I will do is we'll just check this, refresh this, so we have that there. And what I'll do is go inside our API, and we will run the SQL command. So what I'll do is I'll have SQL equals this select star from jobs, and we will run this. So we're going to say we'll use the session object to run this, and we have a result value or return value as session dot execute, and I will do the SQL, and we just cannot pass it as raw SQL just for safety purposes. We'll use text from SQL model to kind of sanitize it, and text, and we do not need to pass any values because we do not have any filters in our SQL. And I'll do this and say mappings.all, right? Or you could just say fetch all, whatever works for you. So this kind of returns the Python native object, and we will just print this to see what our result is. We have our server running, and if we refresh this, we can see that there are three job items there, right? So if we just pass this in our context, we should be able to use this. And here it says title, so in our template, we'll just go ahead and fix that. So if I do this for job, in jobs, we'll say job.title, not the object itself. And if we come to the main.py, we should be able to add the context here as jobs and add this RV there, right? Or we'll just say jobs here. And we'll come here and say jobs. So if we filter, if you save that, and there you go. So we have the job titles right in there, right? Now, so this kind of works. So we know what we are looking at. So if you have a web interface, kind of to check the frequency of the scrape. So we'll only be scraping the job titles. You could always add more information to this table, etc., etc. Now, there you go, right? So we will have one more endpoint to insert the job titles that we scrape, so that we don't have to handle that from the scraper. So yeah, that's what we'll do next. Now I will go ahead and create the endpoint for inserting the newly scraped job titles. So that will be a post request. We're going to say app.post slash jobs, and you can just name it anything as you like. I'm going to say async def insert jobs, let's say, and we have our payload, and it will be a list of job titles. So I'll just import the list type. So I'm going to say from typing import list, and we'll come here list of, and that's where our models come in. So I'll just use this insert job titles model. I'm going to insert, say, from api.models, import that, and I will come here and add that. And okay, that will be named as payload. Let's say we'll accept that inside our function as payload. And we need our session dependency so that we can use that object. Session equals depends on the get db session, and we have that here. So let's see what we have. Okay, so we have an error here. List of module list. We'll see what's the problem. Okay, so from typing import list, that should solve that. And what I will do here is I will just rename this payload. So that's a payload, and we will write the SQL for this. So I'm going to say SQL equals insert into jobs. I'm going to say title. I think that's right. And values are going to be title. So that's where this will come. So these are the columns, and this is the value. And for the values, which will be basically the payload, right? And I'll say RV, we don't need to return it because it's session.execute, and we'll say text of SQL, and we'll provide the values. We'll do this. I think we need to convert that into a Python native object instead of the SQL model object. So we'll say values equals this titles, and I'm gonna say item, or let's say title for title in payload. We'll just see if that works out. Okay, we'll just print this before we kind of run any executions. Just move all the way, right? And let's see if this is fine. So inserting the jobs, I think I need this. Okay, values and the title there. We have the print values there. We'll just go here and we'll go to slash docs. So we have Swagger API here. Slash do this. We'll have an empty just string print returns an empty response. We will go back here. Values does this. So we need to do dot title there. So they're gonna say, I'll say job dot title and say for job in payload. This should be fine, I guess. We'll just run that again. And if you look at this, we've got a title string, right? So that's fine. And we will write the code for inserting this. So we have the SQL, we have the values. We'll say session.execute text of SQL and providing the values. We'll do session.commit. So when you insert something or update something, you need to do commit. If you're getting a SQL, just like we did here, we just have to do session.execute. And there we have that. Cool. And we will return, we'll just return, let's say, message inserted, right? So let's say message inserted jobs. That's it. And we will test that out. So if we open our this, we will go to our API here. We'll just refresh that, try that out. We will say what we will say. We'll say backend developer. We will execute that. Insert jobs. We will run that again. There you go. Right, we have that. We'll just try multiple. So copy that. We'll put a comma, paste that. We'll say front end dev, front end developer. Save that. If we just do this, I can see we've got two back developer. Just drop one of them. Delete from jobs where ID equals, let's say, 5. And if we check that, so we have our table there. Now, this is all we need from the API part. So if we just check in our web application, we could find that the jobs here. So this is working fine, right? Now this is where we will start working on the scraper code and we will move on to this part of the code base. So just open that. So this is where we'll be starting next. I'm inside the indeed underscore scraper.py. Before we start coding, we'll just explain what I'll be doing here. So the idea is we have a JSON file which will drive our entire scraper. So any scraper that you want to write, basically it's just you just have to modify this JSON file, right? And that's the one good thing about scraping with Chrome DevTools protocol. So the JSON file is just my thing, my way of doing it. You do not have to have a JSON file. I like to have a JSON file so that anytime I'm writing a new scraper, all I have to do is create a new JSON file and just inject that, and basically have a new scraper without writing a lot of code. So what we will do is, let's say we have an execute function which will trigger a scraper. And what this function does is create a browser instance, and we will get the browser instance WebSocket URL by sending a HTTP request. And what else? We will run the commands in the scraper steps JSON file, which we will create. And what else do? We need to run by these files. Okay, so before we run, we need to create a WebSocket object. Create a WebSocket object, and then basically run through the scraper steps in the JSON file. And then we will, once we've done with these, so basically we'll reach the end page where we need to scrape. We will get the raw HTML contents and parse it using beautiful soup, and just parse the job titles. We'll just get that, or let's say extract the job titles. Cool. And call the API to insert the job titles to the database, so that we can view the updated result in our web page. So if I can write this, I can say def execute pass, and we will have a couple of util functions. So we created a util.py. So this is where we'll be writing all these methods to kind of do the initial part. So I'll say def create browser instance. We'll just write some dummy code. Pass def get, let's say, browser WebSocket endpoint. Will just be explicit as possible so that you understand what that function does. And we have, let's say, get scraper steps, right? Basically just read that JSON file and return the result. And let's say def get page HTML. So that basically gets the raw HTML from the saved HTML page on our disk. And def, let's just say parse page HTML, or let's say parse page, and I'll just say parse page HTML, and let's say def insert jobs, which will just call make an HTTP request to our API and insert that. And there we have that, right? So we'll just import all these. I'll just remove the, what should I remove this now? We'll just keep it here, right? So I'll just say from scraper.util import these, create this, get browser WebSocket endpoint, get scraper steps, get page HTML, and parse page HTML and insert jobs. And what else do we need here? We need to create a WebSocket endpoint. So we need the WebSocket module. So I'm going to say import WebSockets. And we need, in this file, we need to send a HTTP request. So we obviously need the request module. And we need the beautiful soup package. So I'm going to say from beautiful soup. We'll just check that. So let's say beautiful full soup Python. We have that. For BS4, import that. Okay. And what else? So if we insert jobs, we have the request module. For parsing, we have that. Maybe we need the JSON module. I'm not sure. I just kept it here. And we have that. So we'll start with the util.py file, so that because we need all those methods completed inside the indeed scraper.py file. So we'll start with that. So I will start with the create browser instance function, and I'll be using this subprocess module to kind of create a subprocess. And so I have some code here. So this is the command basically. And say browser equals subprocess.p open, and put this inside there, right? Let me just close that, and I will return the browser instance. Cool. And so let me just explain what I have done here, right? The subprocess module creates lets us run a different program. And which program am I running? I'm running the Google Chrome executable. Now, this tab will differ based on your operating system, right? So I'm on Linux, I'm on Ubuntu 22. I've got Google Chrome as the name of the executable. If you're on Mac or Windows, this might slightly differ. You just have to do a quick Google search to find the executable. I'll show you a quick method how to find it. And these are basically flags to kind of, immediately let's open the browser instead of asking some of the questions they ask where, do you want to sign up, or do you want to set this as your default browser? And the user data directory kind of creates, so this lets us create a new profile instead of working with that default profile. And the remote debugging port equals 9222. This is what we use to kind of send the WebSocket request over to the browser, right? And this is basically a short introduction on what this function does. There will be a link to the blog post, of everything that we do here, so you can just copy this command from there and change the command based on your executable. And so, yeah, we have that function, and we will write one quick function to kind of get the browser WebSocket endpoint. So to write this function, we'll just refer the Chrome DevTools protocol, so you understand where this is coming from. So if I go to Chrome DevTools protocol, we'll open this link, GitHub Pages link, and what I will show you is this endpoint here. So we've got slash JSON slash version. Okay, this is what we need. So when we open a browser with the port open 9022, what we get is we can send an HTTP request to that port on localhost. And if we navigate to this endpoint slash JSON slash list, we'll be able to access this WebSocket URL, right? So this is the WebSocket URL we'll be using to send requests over. And so what we will do is send a GET request, parse this JSON list, and kind of use this WebSocket URL as our way to send request. So this is what we'll exactly do here. We have the request module to send that. We have the JSON module to kind of parse that. And we'll just remove this. So let's say URL equals HTTP colon localhost port 92 slash JSON slash list. And we will send a request. I'll say response equals request dot get URL equals URL, and let's say verify equals false. These are very common parameters here. Timeout equals 10 seconds, and let's say if the response is 200, we'll just say response JSON equals response.json, and otherwise we'll just return an empty string. We'll say for item in response JSON, right? What we need is basically, what I'll check is if the title is equal to a new tab, right? So when we open a browser, if the title is equal to a new tab, we will get this WebSocket URL. So I'm going to say if item.title, item.get title, this empty string, or just do this equals to new tab. What I'll do is get the WebSocket debugging URL. I'll just say item, let's say ws endpoint equals item.get this, and we will return the endpoint here, ws endpoint. And so when we call this function, we will just send a request. We will have the WebSocket debugging URL, so we can send the request to our Chrome DevTools or Chrome instance. So we'll complete these functions. So to get the scraper steps is basically just reading the JSON file. So I'll have a scraper underscore steps.json file, and I will just put some random, just empty list there. And we will go ahead and say with open of dot slash scraper steps of JSON, read it, and get the file pointer, data equals, let's say, scraper steps equals JSON dot load of f, and basically just return the scraper steps. And that's all for that function. We don't actually need to get page HTML because we're doing that using the scraper steps. The parse HTML parse page HTML insert job. We'll just write the insert jobs. Let's say we have a payload that we want to insert, right? And we will make a call to our API, which is running in port 8080. So we have this localhost colon port 8080 slash jobs, and we will say response equals request dot get of URL equals URL, JSON equals the payload, verify equals false, timeout timeout equals, let's say, 10 seconds, and we'll just print the response. And it's not get request, it's a post request. And yeah, so we have that parse page HTML. We'll do that once we see what the page HTML is basically is, so we don't have to work there. And now we'll start working with the indeed scraper.py, where we'll call all these functions, and yeah, we'll start from there. So I have renamed our scraper folder here to scraper app because we have a root folder as scraper. And what I'll start by doing is we have the imports here. We'll call the create browser instance function. So I'm going to say browser equals create browser instance. We will sleep for some seconds. So import it from time import sleep, and we'll sleep for 5 seconds before we try and fetch the browser WebSocket URL. So I'm going to say sleep of 5, and then say ws, let's say endpoint equals get browser WebSocket endpoint, and we'll just print that we know so this is working. And I'll do this, and let me just clear this out. Indeed scraper.py, and we have that there. And there you go. So we have our WebSocket endpoint printed out here. If we look at this, we have our browser instance here. So this is working fine. So we just close this out, Control C, and we'll move on from here. Okay, so the file that I have here is the scraper underscore steps.json file. And this is basically all our scraper code, right? Now, when you write scrapers using Puppeteer or Playwright, you write code like await page.navigate to this URL. And basically what happens underneath is, if you look at this command here, this is basically a WebSocket message payload, right? That command is converted into, right? So when you say page.navigate, it's basically, it has an ID. What method is it sending? It's page.navigate. What are the parameters it's sending? There's a URL, right, which is in.indie.com. Now, what this is kind of a weird way of web scraping, but the good thing is if you know how to execute this, writing new scrapers becomes extremely easy. So what I'll do now is kind of read through the scraper JSON file, and so you can understand what's actually happening here. So in the first request that we send, so we are setting the viewport of the browser instance. So we're setting the viewport as 800 by 800. And so if you just go to the WebSockets Chrome DevTools protocol, and you can just find all of the required messages here, right? So if we look at this, we've got emulation, and you can find that here. So if you just read through the docs, you can find that all the messages that I've written here, or you can just find it in the documentation, right? So if you look in the page, there's page.navigate and page.enable, all the required messages. So that's our first message. In the second message, what we're doing is we want to open a page, right? We want to navigate to a page X, and this is the format. So if you look at this, we should find page.navigate. There you go. So if I search for that, it has the parameters, which is URL, some reference string, etc. We have passed the URL as in the params, and this is how you send it. In the third message is basically I've added some filters to this. So initially we opened the home page. Now I added some filters as job, software engineer, the location is Delhi, and from page one, etc. From age. Basically, what I'm doing is I've selected all the filters and I just copied the URL. So I'm only getting the job titles from in the last 24 hours. And so these are a couple of messages. Again, I want the mouse to be moved to the X and Y location. I want to scroll the mouse. So basically, I'm trying to load all the, some websites, when we load to the bottom, they fetch and add a new request. So what I'm doing is from this X position, I want to add a delta Y. basically is I want to scroll like for 2000. That's the unit on for Chrome DevTools protocol, and then I'm getting the page HTML. So what I do is send a get document request, and to get the actual HTML page, you send the dom.getOuter.html. You can refer to these inside the Chrome DevTools protocol and kind of figure that out. It's extremely easy to kind of navigate through the docs. Okay, so what are we doing next? So since we have the scraper steps file here, we need to load it and try and run through these steps. So I'll just turn that off, and we'll call the scraper steps function. So I'm gonna say scraper steps equals get scraper steps, and we'll just print that out so we know this is being returned. And I will kind of comment this out. So because we already know this is working, we did not have to go through that again. So if I say Python 3 indeed script.py, okay, there you go. So that's being printed. And what we will do is create a WebSocket endpoint connection and then actually send these message payloads. So the way this works is I need to import WebSockets. We've done that. We need to look in the WebSockets protocol. WebSockets docs. That's the Python module docs that we're looking for. And if we look at here, we need the client implementation. We'll just go for this synchronous client, right? So I'll just copy that and just remove that there. And async i.client.connect. I will just use async i, it doesn't matter. So well, okay, if we use async i, then we need to do async sync client. There you go. So if we do use async IO, we need to have a async main function. You need to use the async event loop. We'll just avoid that, right? Because this is just for demonstration purposes. And I'll say with connect of ws this endpoint as, let's say, ws. We'll say ws. Okay, so we have a WebSocket and connection here. Now, one important thing is you provide the max size object, right? So if max size equals to none, the reason we give this parameter is even if the result of the response payload is huge, we will be able to accommodate at that in our response. So by default, I think it's 1024 bytes, something like that. So by setting max size equals none, we can accept any size payload that returns as the response. So what we will do now is we have a WebSocket endpoint. Now we'll say for scraper step, or it says step in scraper steps, we will actually send that to the server. So I'm going to say ws.send. I'm guessing that's the function. The message is going to be message equals step. We have to send the message as JSON. So I'm going to say json.dumps of the step. And we need to import the JSON module. I will turn this off. And what we will do is, while true, we will sleep for a couple seconds before we send. We'll just sleep for 10 seconds. So sleep of 10. And we will receive the message. I'm going to say response message equals ws.recv, and response message obj equals json.loads of this, right? And we will break out of that while loop, right? So extremely easy code. We won't print this here, and let's see. We'll print the step ID so that we know this is working. So let me just print that. Step.get of ID. I think this should work. Let's see, because all of our steps have an ID parameter. Cool. So when we reach 6, and that should let us know our function has ended. And let's see if this works. So that's step 1. So we need to wait for, because we gave 10 seconds, we kind of need to wait for that. And we have a browser instance here. We'll see if this is working fine. Okay, that opens up. So that's step two. Okay, step 10. So we gave the order in, some random order. So we have that here. So we'll just wait until we see step six. So we make sure, it's working fine. There you go, right? We see step six. Basically, we know our function is, working fine. So the moment we see step six, right? So we see step six, we need to store the response in our page, which is basically where we load the page HTML. So for that, we will write code to kind of see if this step is six. We will kind of, hey, I want to store that file into a HTML file, right? So I'm going to say, so what I'll still say is if response message object dot get ID, for the response will be the exact same ID that we sent. So if this is equal to six, what I need to do is save the result or the HTML to a file. So I'm going to say HTML content equals response message object dot get result dot get out HTML. That's how the response will be. So we'll just show that in here. So we need to find the dom dot get out HTML, and there you go, right? So the return object will have outer HTML string as the key to the results. So I have this, and we will write that to a file. So we'll just write a util function to save that. So if we go inside this, before we pause, we'll just say def write page HTML, write HTML content. Let's quite take in some HTML content string. We will say with open of page content.html. In write mode as f, we'll say f dot write the HTML content string, and that's it, right? And we will import this function, turn that off. We'll copy the name, put that there, and we will pass in the HTML content there. Oops. You want to pass this, and that should work. So if we just run this again, probably this should work, and we should have a file saying, okay, so we need actually okay, page content.html. We should have files with the name page content.html with the detail with the actual HTML content. Okay, so we will just try and run this to see if we are able to, view the HTML contents inside the file. So I'll just run this using Python 3 indeed.scraper.py, and we will make sure that we have the HTML contents. So we have step one. So it's setting the emulation, like setting the viewport. So it's opening the next page. We'll just confirm it with the steps so we don't have to look at the HTML, the page navigation stuff. Okay, I'm assuming that's done. So we have a script ended. We will close this and try and see if we have a file there. And there you go, right? We are actually able to see the HTML contents. And so, which means let's assume that these HTML contents of the window has been scraped, and now we just need to pass through that file. So if we look at this, right, so what we will do is go into one of the objects here, try and inspect this. We'll just bring this to the bottom and look at what we need for the titles. We'll just see, look at this title here. Let's see, we got a span and a title for this, or we'll find a better tag. So we have an A tag and roll button on, area label. Okay, we have an H2 with the class job title. And let's see if this has a text inside it. So I think getting the HTML content or text inside this would be good enough. It's the company location. Let's just get the H2 and see what we have, right? So we'll just call the parse function, parse a page cut or whatever we wrote, and try and see what we have. So I will do this. Let's see. So we will comment all of this, and we will just call the parse HTML function. And let's just see, we've got parse page HTML. We will call that, and right, and we will go into util and just complete that. We know the file name is page HTML, so we'll just copy this part, and we'll do this in read mode. And it'll say HTML content equals f.read, and I'll say soup equals, we'll convert that into node. We'll use the HTML content as our string, and we'll use the LXML module. And what we will do is grab all h2, so let's say job titles equals soup.find all h2 tags with the class job title. And let's just print that, or let's just do for job title in job titles. I'm gonna say print job title dot text, right? So for each of the h2 tag, we'll just print the job title of the text content basically and see what we get. So if we have this here, we will just run this. So let's say Python 3 indeed scraper.py. There you go, right? We can actually see the job titles here, and all we need to now is call the insert API, and so that will insert our titles into the database. So what we will do next is this. So we need to actually create the payload in structure. So let's go back to the indeed scraper.py file, and we have the parsed. So okay, so we'll create a job titles list. So I'm gonna say job titles, or say job equals an empty list, and we will do here is jobs.append job title.text, right? And we will return the jobs, and when we call this, we will have this as jobs, and we will create the payload as payload equals, because we need to send this in the way our API expects. We'll just say job for job in jobs, and we can close that. And so when we parse the page HTML, we need to return the jobs equals this, and we will call the insert jobs of jobs. And yes, so if our expectation is if we run this, we should be able to kind of see that our scraper just insert all the new records. Okay, so we'll try and run this. We just check one more time if we have included all the required stuff. Indeed scraper, insert jobs, you get the jobs, insert jobs. Okay, we'll just try that out. So I'll go do that. Python 3, indeed this. Okay, so there was an issue with this. Max try. Okay, so our API is not practically running. So what I'll do is create a we'll activate this and run our API. So we'll just go into cd space API and we'll do fast API dev main.py minus minus port 880 rich markup. What's that issue? Okay. Oh, so we have not actually activated our endpoint, so that failed right here. So we need to do this env slash bin slash activate. See activate, and then go inside our API and say fast API dev main.py minus minus port 8080, and this should work. If we do this now, we have response 200, and we have this. If we check this in our database, there you go, right? We have this running. We will confirm that with our API 8080, and there you go, right? We can actually see all the job titles here. Now, that's all for this tutorial. The good thing about this is the way we scraped with Chrome DevTools protocol is you basically, the only thing you need is the Chromium executable. So if you have installed Chrome on your local device, you basically have that. And then having a WebSocket library is almost most programming language these days have WebSocket library. Even if you're a C++ developer, you could just go ahead and use Boost Beast or WebSocket, micro WebSockets or any other framework that you're familiar with, and then write a scraper, right? You could have a very small executable that will scrape, you could just you run that using a cron job every couple hours, and then you have all the required data that you need. And thank you so much for watching.